levels of use. So I mentioned that before. The stages of concern address the affective side, right? Attitudes, feelings. Levels of use have to do with behavior and acting. So let's make a little exercise. I'm not sure if you want to choose an innovation. I think it might be best if I give you an innovation. Maybe something, maybe I don't know from which areas you're coming from, but since we all played the simulation game, let's call the innovation. We want to use simulations in the teaching of diffusion of innovation, of change. I would like you to take just a couple minutes and jot down what are 3 non-use levels, meaning what would people do that looks like they're using simulations, but they're not. And then come up with 5 levels of use that would be acceptable. So I give an example. A use level might be there are inputs, and every time you change the inputs, you get a different output, which exactly happened with our game. That would be a use level. A non-use level would be that there is only one particular way to win the game. Then that's not necessarily a simulation game. It's just rote memorization of a path. Yeah, let's take 2 minutes, and then I'll ask that you share use levels or non-use levels. If you feel more comfortable with one level, and just say, I think I get it what non-use levels are, let me come up with a couple, and you don't come up with use levels, that's perfectly fine. Think about behaviors and actions with respect to using simulation in games in education. All right. I'm experienced right now what my sister is a teacher in Germany, and she did a lot of online teaching now during the pandemic. And by law in Germany, students are not allowed to turn on the video because of privacy concerns, because it's it's being transmitted through US servers. So my sister called it the wall of silence, and no pictures and no nothing. So Yes.
Yeah, we experienced that.
So who wants to share like a non-use level or a use level?
Can I have a try?
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, my name is Habibah. For the simulation, I think after we're concerned to have a try of the simulation. When we talk about using, me myself experienced the simulation. I think we can put it into two kind of use. How we use the simulation. First, I think my first instinct is that I need to explore, but then in other thought is that I need to have some sort of instruction or guide for me to how to go about with the simulation. So in terms of use, any of these two might occur for I think anyone. Simulation will be associated with game. So one thing is to use something, we will associate with something that is similar to the things that we want to use, isn't it? So my first guess is that this is a game. So for games, when I see my children playing game, they explore. We don't have to teach, we don't give them manuals, but for a person like me, quite old, so I need some sort of guide. So when we want to observe people, whether they are using it or not using it, we need to consider whether what will be their background, like me, whether they are young people or they are, I mean, they are people who need guide. So I have experience doing both for the simulation, and for the first time which I used explore, that I thought that I'm quite young, I can explore. I managed just to get 3 adopter. But when I use this all time, I mean, this guide, read it through the rules carefully, and then look at the profile of everyone carefully, I managed to get the second round 15 adopter. So it's kind of tricky to, you know, to positions,
Yes.
to drive people to use something according to their background or their understanding of the things that they want to use. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I completely agree. I mean, this is a game in a way, right? And in a completely acceptable format is to explore. Like I remember when I encountered the game the first time, I just randomly clicked interventions. I just wanted to know what actually happens. I didn't know, for example, that certain interventions impact a range of people. I didn't know that some interventions were like, well, if you didn't do this intervention before, you will have a lot of, you know, that was a wasted intervention at that time, right? I didn't know that. I mean, I could have read the instructions, as you said, but, you know, I didn't bother. So exploring is part of any game. And then instructions might lead us to more unstructured understanding, and guided way. Sometimes you can compare it to, you know, when you install something. Maybe you're just doing an installation, and then when something goes off, then you're reading the manual. Perfectly fine in a gaming situation. Yeah. Good examples for use. Anybody else? So either you don't have anything or you're too shy to mention. Could be either way.
Johannes, I'm just thinking about when you said simulations, you know, in teaching or learning, I was thinking about something else because my area in chemical engineering is to actually do modeling and simulation.
Yes.
And we do use for students to understand the different behaviors of processes. it's best to learn through simulations, because computer simulations, otherwise it will be too time consuming to calculate everything. So I have experienced before, when I have them in my class, they would not have been exposed to doing a lot of simulations and learning from simulations. So once when I managed to get a batch of students who had used mathematical software to look at different behaviors of chemical reactors, once after they have gone through a reaction. So I was excited because I thought that, wow, now this time I have a batch of students who would know more and I can do more things with them rather than teaching them from scratch.
Yes.
But I found out that they got too fixated on the software itself. Like, oh, to start, you have to click this. And then, oh, if it's not doing this, you click that. And then, then you try to click this and then you try to, and I was like, oh, wow. They are not focusing on the mathematical model and looking at the influence of certain variables towards the model. What does it mean physically? And it turned out that they got too fixated with the tool rather than learning from the tool.
Which is a great example of non-use, right?
Yes.
They seem to be engaging with the simulation, but it's a random clicking and it's not going on a deeper level of maybe what is the mechanism behind it, or what is the relationship between different variables or systems of variables. Yeah, it's a good example for non-use. You want them to explore, right? So there's sometimes a fine line between what is exploration and what is just random clicking of levers and seeing what happens. Another element what sparked in me when you mentioned that is an use aspect here would be a reflective element, right? Can they actually describe what they did? Can they metacognition out of that? That might be another use element. If we don't, this is not Monopoly or similar games. At the end of, you have a laugh and somebody wins and somebody loses and the game is over. This is about learning. Anybody else wants to share something? Either non-use or use.
Let me have a try. Johannes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In order to identify whether a person is a user or non-user, so maybe we can look at whether or not the person is able to follow the instructions of the game, of the simulation. The second of non-use is whether or not the person understand or do not understand the rules and regulations of the game. Okay, the third one is the strategy used by the user. So the non-user usually use try and error strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for user, the person should be able to respond to the feedback, because during the simulation game, feedback is always given from the pop-up window, and able to follow the instruction, able to use effective strategy to get high score. And the last indications of user is the person should be able to get high score at the end of the game. Okay, that's all for my answer.
There's a lot of different, you hit it right on the nail. I mean, that's very, very, very observant about simulations in games. So the one is, I liked particularly trial and error versus strategy. Are you using actually feedback from the system to get better, right? And then I played this game once with graduate students, and when we discussed the game at the end, one of them didn't even know that you had to reach a level of adopters. I mean, that's like going right into what you mentioned about basic reading of instructions. So there's a lot of wisdom in what you mentioned in terms of non-use and use. Let me, for a matter of time, let me continue and show you a little bit of levels of use. So you have, of course, the non-use area. No interest is shown. You have, is that person gathering information about the innovation, right? And this might be reading instructions. Is there, you know, does it look at the screen? In our case, for the simulation, that is, of course, different with any other innovation. Begins a plan. So now we're talking a little bit about the level of, you know, strategizing, for example, ways to implement or ways to use this particular innovation. Mechanically, so, you know, how does it actually work, the mechanics of it? Then you have in 4, you have 2. The one is, are you comfortable with the innovation and implement it as taught? So you want actually, before people get overly creative and do their own thing, you want to make sure they actually understand it enough to implement it as it is taught. And in this context of routine, you usually get people to also start and saying, wait a second, this element, while I'm teaching it, I could actually see this element being improved, or this needs to be refined, or in my context, that might not work. So you find refinement aspects. And then the integration, it's it's more of an aspect of you know, a lot of times our innovations for education, they come in conjunction or in connection with others. And so you don't want just to, like in our case with the creativity use in engineering classroom, you don't want just the faculty to say, well, now it's creativity time, and now we do a project and then it has nothing to do with creativity, right? There is a disconnect. If creativity doesn't show up throughout in a variety of different ways, is it really integrated? And then the renewal aspect is like really taking the refinement and really exploring it a lot further and saying, what are different ways? What can I actually do? Does that make sense? Okay, great. So how do you get at levels of use? You could look at what is called a branching interview. And this can be relatively quickly when you're saying, are you currently looking for information about the innovation? No. Then you know this is level of use 0 or 1. If yes, it's a 2. Well, have you decided to use it and set a date to begin using it? You are reaching now, no, then you're on a different level and you're still stuck with 0, 1, or 2. If yes, then you have a higher level. So you can see these questions. And by the way, all these slides I will share with Professor Herrera. So you should all have them available to you. You don't have to draw anything or take screenshots or something like that. So you can see here, basic 5-6 questions can really give you insight of where they are in the level of use. And this is helpful, right? Like this was, for example, a really big, that's a big eventual early step. Are you actually doing it? So, okay, you tell me you will do it in your classroom or you will do it in your teaching. When? Where? Which course? Right? If they can narrow that down, it's not going to happen. So what are you using? Are you using this intervention? What kinds of changes are you making? What needs to be adapted? What might not work? That gives you a lot of sense about refinement. It gives you a sense about possibly you asked that question after the first or the second iteration they did. So these are not coming at one sitting. They're coming throughout the life cycle of an innovation. So I highly recommend branching interviews while the use of the innovation is going on. We are getting now to innovation configurations, which is then used. It's used to map what your innovation actually will look like. It clarifies what a new program is or what it isn't. It then defines quality. What does practices look like? Indicates a degree to which the innovation is being implemented. Best assisting and supporting educators' successful use of new practices. Then it provides a blueprint for learning and planning and resources. And then it determines significant factors that ensure successful implementation. It's important for these mapping exercise that you are describing behaviors. So we're back at the, if you wish, we are back at the levels of use. You need to be specific for whom it actually is. Is that behaviors for administrators? Is that for faculty, students? It should focus on major outcomes. It should look at what is an ideal implementation. And then a continuing of behavior from ideal to not existing or not yet begun. It will become clearer in a moment. I will share a spreadsheet I made that's actually interactively usable for all of us. And it's also necessary to understand not everything needs to be narrowed down to or spread out over 6 levels. It could be just ideal, acceptable, non-acceptable. It doesn't have to be specified to the last detail. Oops. That's not. Let me unshare for a moment. Here we go. All right. Let me place that into the chat. So everybody should have access to this Google spreadsheet. I just saw a question from Farah, how to decide the behavior determined for each role. Can you explain a little bit what is underneath, what's behind the question?
Yeah, you mentioned about the CI just now, that the CI is meant for us to determine what kind of behavior they should exhibit when we try to monitor using the CI. But my question goes to, what will be the resources for us to use in order to determine what sort of behaviors that fit for each roles, whether if administrator, for example, what will be the behavior that we want to get from them. So when I have a very huge problem when developing the CI, because I wasn't sure what I want to dictate them in terms of the behaviors. That's my concerns. If you have any ideas.
Yes, there's a couple different ways of doing that. One of them is there will be, when you talk with, for example, faculty, when you talk with faculty, they might describe to you what they need in order to be successful for their teaching from another group. Then the behavior that is determined for example, administrators or for students is coming from the faculty who implement. If you look at administrators, they will mention what they expect from that, what they hope to achieve with supporting this innovation.
So the
And
resources
they
for
might
this
specify,
information, yeah, sorry for cutting you in the middle.
yeah,
But so what do you mean that the resources for me to develop the behaviors for each roles of, for example, administrator, students, meaning it does not come from the prior analysis, but it's something that is being set on which direction that the faculties or the universities are heading to. So it's not something that driven.
Yeah, I would say partly. So the innovation itself will have a certain grounding, right? You come up with a particular, you're focusing or advocating for a very specific innovation. Where is that innovation coming from? Has that been developed? Has that been tested?
I think Johannes and friends, I think there's a misunderstood about faculty. The word faculty used in Malaysia mean the faculty is not the people or the lecturer, but in the US faculty mean the lecturer. So
yes, faculty members, maybe it's better to say that. Yes. So yes. So thanks for clarifying that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, on the one hand, you have behaviors that come from the theory or research of the innovation, right? And certain innovation dictates certain behaviors. Like, for example, in problem-based learning, there should be tutors, students should collaborate, they should ask themselves in the beginning, what do I know? What do I don't know? What might be there out there? What might influence a project? And I have no idea. Assessment that has certain implications for assessment. They should explore the problem first, and content comes secondary to answer the problem. You know, we can go probably and put together a whole list of behaviors that come from the innovation. That's relatively, and I'm saying that lightly, this is relatively easy described because it comes from an already published background. Other people have done it. There are implementation strategies. There are behaviors associated with it on different levels. Now we get into the innovation, what it describes is well defined to a certain degree. Now we get into the problem, what are behaviors that surround it? Like, what do you need? What do you need somebody else to do in order for you to successfully implement PBL? Given that PBL requires of you these different elements. And that's, you can either look at the literature with, there's a bit of literature on what faculty, what their concerns are and tensions they face. But you might also say, okay, I'm sitting down with people and discussing with them what they need in an ideal situation. What is ideal behavior? And, you know, and it could be a variety of different things, depending on the institutional context, depending on who the individual actors are, like who is all involved in that. That requires conversations. That usually, in my experience, does not come from published material alone. You will get then also the issue of you will also get the issue of conflicting, and particularly the non-use. For example, you might get, what do you definitely don't want to see from your dean or from your department head, department chair to do that would really stop you doing this innovation. Like, if I hear people saying, well, it's time consuming, so to prepare, and then I'm getting 4 more classes to teach, right? That's just makes it impossible to spend a lot of time in an innovation. Or I'm not getting preparation time, or my tutor money, my TAs getting all cut. I don't have, I teach a class of 150 students in a problem-based learning format. I need some other people present there who help me teach and be present with these students. So that might be then, that might be non-use aspects. If then budget cuts come for certain areas, might also be, I had that in one institution where we did PBL. There was a committee in the college or faculty that decided teaching awards, and half the committee members felt PBL instructors, they're not doing much, so they should be excluded from getting teaching awards. And that was, of course, if people, that was completely disencouraging for people to go PBL route when they knew that there was an entire committee that would look negatively at their case. Does that make sense?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, that helps. Thank you, Dennis.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I need to figure out what sort of a fundamental theoretical perspective that I brought when it comes to the innovations being discussed. I think that's the interview is going to help in developing the CI as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Also consider the early assumptions. Consider the early assumptions of CBAM. It is a process, so you might figure out in the beginning what might stop it or what might be supportive, and then once the innovation rolls out, you might suddenly realize there is a shift. People have now different needs when they're doing more. So this is actually an iterative process. You cannot assume the needs in the beginning of the innovation are the same as in the middle or when it's fully rolled out. Their needs will change, and some needs might disappear and others will be added or changed. Yes, we are. I think we have in our schedule actually a break planned. So let's convene back in about 10 minutes, and I'll see you all in 10 minutes again.